Well, welcome today to this episode of the podcast. I am thrilled today to have Premela Deck with us, who lives in Massachusetts and has some incredible things to share with all of us about the way that she has morphed her own career and practice as both a lawyer and I think, doctorate in social work, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Ph.D. in social work, also master's in social work, in order to really try to help children flourish and help families get through this really broken area in a much better way. So welcome, Pramela. Thanks for doing this with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So maybe just start in by introducing yourself a little bit. I think you have such an interesting route to where you've landed. So give us a little insight. Did you become a lawyer first?
Yeah, no, it's great. I started a JD MSW program. So it's a combined program. There were two separate schools, but they took electives from each other. So rather than 5 years, it's 3 years for law school and two usually for your master's. It was 4 years. And so I was learning, it felt really interesting. I would go to law school and I was learning the law, and then I would go to my school of social work and learning social work, but there was no bridge between the two. And that's like a recurring theme for me throughout my career. And so I'll probably touch upon that as we continue to speak. So I had these two schools and these two disciplines that I were learning, but like never the two shall meet.
Right.
And so it really wasn't until I started doing internships that I started to think about there's more here, there's something missing. And then I ultimately ended up going to my PhD, and I did my PhD at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And my PhD was on law and social work collaboration, which was like how I framed it. But ultimately, I learned that that was forensic mental health. And so court involved mental health with sort of this baseline. There's a really cool theory called therapeutic jurisprudence, which
Mm.
is just interdisciplinary approach to legal issues with the goal of looking at the law and reforming law so that it has a positive impact on people who are in court. And that just feels like it defines who I am. All
Mm.
of my work is court involved, but I come at it with this legal background and this mental health background, and I'm trying to figure out for professionals and for clients and for myself, where do they overlap and how do I make that a successful experience for people who are in the court process?
So tell me about your own group practice that you have. I mean, it seems like you probably came out of that PhD program, worked for a while for others or something, and then realized there's this demonstrable need for something else. Like, tell me about that process of how you
Sure.
opened your own group and how you're building that kind of resource in Massachusetts.
Yeah. So I graduated with my PhD in North Carolina, and then I moved up to Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. And when I was in college, I clerked for a judge that was local. And so I emailed that judge and I was like, what in the world do people do with the law degree and a mental health degree? She wrote back to me and she said, I need you to come see this program. And so at William James College, which is in Massachusetts, they had a forensic program.
Mhm.
And so they hired postdocs. It was two or three every year. And they learned how to write child custody evaluations under the tutelage of somebody who was more seniored. And that was Robin Deutsch and Christy Harms, Judge Christy
Mm.
Harms. So I joined that program and it was great. Child custody evaluations, I learned a ton. I was also supervised by Dr. Jessica Greenwald O'Brien. I really loved that work. But again, that was one small portion of
Mhm.
like the full spectrum of forensic mental health services that were available. And child custody evaluations, have a purpose, but often, at least in Massachusetts, they end with, I recommend this family get therapy, or I recommend a parenting coordinator get
Mhm.
involved.
Mhm.
So then I realized, all right, well, there are three people in Massachusetts that do that work. So we have a miss here. So I started doing that work. I started learning how to do, I also don't call it reunification therapy. I fondly call it MFT, and it stands for multifaceted family therapy. And the
Yeah.
idea being all of those people are involved, including professionals.
Mm.
So I started studying on how to do those family therapy cases, how to be a good parent coordinator. And then my solo practice just boomed because I was able to speak those two languages, the legal language and the mental health language, and to really bridge a gap between people who were grieving and that is what it is. There's often a grief
Mhm.
process.
Yes.
So sometimes the conflict plays out because there's like an underlying mental health component that has to be addressed before we can do that legal work. So my practice started booming. I had made my first hire and then it kind of snowballed. In all honesty, my business was a little bit reactive rather
Right.
than intentional. It sort of developed in a more organic way. And I started hiring, and I hired some really incredible people and really encouraged them to show me where they felt like there were needs. And then from that, new programs were starting to develop. So we were learning that before people could even do the parent coordination work or family therapy work, there was almost pre-work that was needed. And so we developed like the respect program, which is how do you guys just regulate your emotions so that you can look at your co-parent who
Mhm.
you hate right now. And I get it.
Yeah.
So, like, giving them their baseline skills, and so these programs just sort of developed organically as we saw these people needing different services. If you were divorcing and you needed somebody, you might hire a financial accountant
Mhm.
that you both agree who's gonna look at your stuff and offer some options, very similar to that. So I get hired jointly by the parties. They're saying, "Hey, we're stuck on this issue. Can you give us some options?" And I'll come and very rarely is there a case where there's one answer. It just,
Right.
like, is always there. And so I can say, here are 5 or 6 options that may work for you and more importantly for your child. And if I can sit at the table with them and with the attorneys, it's really common that we'll take, a couple from option 5 and a couple from option 2 and somehow cultivate something that works, that keeps them out of court. And then I think what's more important is then they've developed some respect in the process and some trust in me. So
Right.
that 6 months down the line or 5 years down the line, when we're choosing colleges, they now have somebody else that they can come do that work with. And so we're laying foundation for these families to do this in a different way that's not adversarial, despite the fact that they are at odds with each other.
I find that really interesting because what you're talking about, though it's structured differently. I mean, for us, collaborative law is not as an entity where, which I have a whole, if people want to go back and listen to it, I have a podcast episode with Terry Harrington, who's our collaborative law czar, who, it really has not taken off in Colorado. What encouraging or admonishing feedback would you give to parents and maybe to the bar or the system or therapists who are in this work in this world, mental health professionals, as to what they really, if you could be changing the world and having people do this the way it should be done, what is your advice in terms of what maybe a lawyer should do, what a mental health professional do, what a parent should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we can have a really good grasp on the duality of these cases, that there is a legal issue and there's also a family therapy or like a family systems issue, and that all of these cases require legal knowledge as well as like family knowledge. And that sometimes we have to make sure that our goals are not misaligned, that our legal goals and our family goals are working in tandem. And I do think it's on the attorneys to collaborate with each other and to talk about, okay, what are we going to agree, even if it's only for the next 3 months, that we're all on the same page that we're working towards. I did have a client once that said to me, he's not my family. Like that, my ex partner, that's not my family. And I replied with, who would your kid say is your family? And inevitably, the kid would say, it's that person and that person and my sibling. So, really helping everybody to remember that this actually is still a family. Parents don't divorce kids, and you are going to be co parenting forever. You will be grandparents together one day, hopefully.
Mm.
So, this is not going to end just when your child is 18. So, figure it out now.